or you mess with them when they got their kids with them or something, you're not going to be able to stop them. So people always think they're bulletproof and invincible, especially these people that crave power and domination. They got a screw loose. They're able to get the power because they'll cheat and steal, but then once they get it, they end up destroying themselves and a bunch of us in the process. So Dr. Roberts is making the key point here. The bureaucracy and the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about is eating our country and the rest of the world. And so you've got the bureaucracy, you've got the elites that think it's going to protect them. But just 101 in every culture, even in modern times, in Africa, Latin America, Asia, Eastern Europe, you always build a secret police network. It always starts spying on the parliament or the government. It always starts killing people and abusing. And a lot of times, oh, here's the new president, general whoever. 6 months later, he gets overthrown. This is the last system. If I was an elite, even if I was evil and corrupt and sadistic and on a power trip, the last system I would want, Dr. Roberts, is what they're putting in. I mean, can you elaborate on that? I think that's where you're going with this, and I think that's why you make the point that you don't think the elite are driving all of this.
Unintended consequences of the elite, as well as some of the intended ones. You see, they're not just eating the country, and they're eating the Constitution. So when you eat the Constitution, you don't have any protection either. You might remember the play, A Man for All Seasons, when Sir Thomas More, the Chancellor of England, he says, so you want me to cut down the law so we can more easily chase after devils? And what will we do when the law is cut down and the devil turns on us?
Yes.
So it's what the Bolsheviks found out. That's what the Politburo found out. They were powerless in the face of Stalin. There was no longer any law. There was only the decision of the General Secretary of the Communist Party. So this is, the elites are preparing their own grave. You're right. But come back to the question of the shift from focus on terrorism to domestic extremists. This is also part of the elite agenda, because who are the domestic extremists? For example, it's environmentalists who get in the way of fracking operations, of blowing up mountains to get coal, of putting mining ventures next to national monuments and parks, of polluting waters in the Gulf of Mexico. These people are inconvenient for powerful mining timber groups. You have other people who are in opposition to Monsanto's genetically modified seeds. They're in the way. You have prophets. You have animal rights people who say animals are living creatures. They shouldn't be treated in inhumane ways in these experiments where you do all these testing, and they're in the way of the drug companies, the testing companies. So all these kinds of people are in the way. In fact, sooner or later, you and I will be in the way, because we don't speak the line. You don't speak the line, you're in the way. So they can use terrorism. That came out of 9/11. They can use the fear of that to expand it into attacks on all critics. And that's what I think Homeland Security is becoming. And you see, why else is Homeland Security stopping traffic on the interstates, or going to bus stations and train stations? There have been no incidents, not even staged FBI instances.
It's a total raw exercise of power to set the precedent.
It's getting us used to it, accepting of it. And you have to understand that the young, they don't even know the old system. They only know what they experience now. So to them, it's just normal. If you get, you just got your driver's license and you've not been driving. You're driving along the interstate and everything's stopped and they're inspecting you. Well, it's all you know. You grew up with it. So you don't know it's a police state. It's just what you know. You're not 40, 50 years old, and you don't remember when something like this would have been inconceivable. So I think that's what's happening to us. And another thing that's happening is, you see, I think the war on terror is wearing out for them. It's been very profitable, but they don't win the wars. You see, if you're a superpower and you have to be in Iraq for 8 years, and the only way you can win is to put the insurgents on the U.S. military payroll and pay them to stop fighting. And if you're in Afghanistan for 11 years and you can't defeat a few thousand Taliban armed with AK-47, then your whole reputation as a superpower starts evaporating.
So they've now announced they've beaten al-Qaeda. They're using al-Qaeda in Syria and also in places like Libya, just admitting it. Oh, this is the good al-Qaeda. That's why we stick our hand. Yeah.
They got to have a new enemy, and so it's going to be China.
Oh, yes. And the American people, though, if we're getting out of line, because they're saying we've won the war against al-Qaeda, and as you said, now let's have a war with China. Break that down.
Well, they don't want a real war. They want a Cold War. See, the most profitable conflict was the Cold War with the Soviets, because everybody knew they weren't going to fight it because there wouldn't be anything left. But the Soviet threat was good for 4 or 5 decades of unlimited military spending, of unlimited CIA power. And the war with the hot war in the Middle East, it's not working for them. It hurts their reputation. It demoralizes the troops. Look, the suicides exceed the battle casualties. So they got to have a new Cold War, and the only real person they can pick on now is China. And that's why we had the naval exercises with Philippines a week or so ago. That's why we're building a new naval base in South Korea on an island. That's why we're sending Marines into Asia and Australia. That's why Hillary Clinton declared the South China Sea to be an area of American national interest.
Sure, the Chinese president said 2 months ago, he said, prepare for war with the United States. Yeah. They're encircling us, but separately, then they pay with a bailout to move the Cadillac and Volt factories over there, and separately let them buy up our infrastructure. I mean, is that part of a double game?
Well, I think it's 2 different interests. See, the choice of them as an enemy is new. The choice of them as a low-cost source of production is 10, 20 years old, and that benefits manufacturers. But the military security industry needs an enemy. So there is a conflict there between 2 powerful interest groups in the United States, but they'll keep it a Cold War. They don't really want a hot war with China. I mean, that's not what they want. They want a long-term threat that they can continue to spend unlimited money on airplanes like the F-22, which their pilots are afraid to fly, and which have now been grounded. They don't care. They don't want a real war. They want a long-term Cold War because they can forever hype the Chinese threat as to why they got to have a bigger defense budget and more power. So I think that's where it's moving, and that's why they're kind of shifting the emphasis. Now, the problem with them getting away from the Middle East is Israel, because Israel's still determined that they attack Syria and Iran. And if Israel succeeds in having us attack Syria and Iran, then we may never get out of the Middle East, or we may come heads to head with China and Russia in a hot type of conflict.
Basically, you and I and others, Ron Paul, we're in the way of their madness and the grave the ruling class is trying to dig for themselves. And as you point out, they have Bilderberg meetings and things and come up with general plans and argue with each other. But I see it everywhere where there are different special interests, sometimes even different divisions of the same big companies are at odds with each other. It really is just a bunch of people running in all directions, stealing everything they can.
Right. And also, you see, they now have the country at odds with itself. There's so much hatred of Americans against Americans, and Democrats and Republicans, and right-wing and left-wing, and Christian Zionists and non-Christian Zionists. I mean, it's just an endless... So we are as split among ourselves as the Romans were in their last years. And so a country that internally split and also now increasingly fearful of their own government is not a very strong country to be taking on China and Russia. So I think they're headed for a lot of surprises. And I don't know when the dollar goes or when the power of the United States collapses. I don't know when it's going to happen. But nothing that they're doing really furthers our future success. It's all at the expense of our future success.
That's the key. What the globalists, what this group of criminals are doing is wrecking the United States. There's no doubt that their policies are cyanide to this republic. In closing, Dr. Roberts, and of course your great new website, well, it's been out 6 months or so, really nice. A lot of great info there, paulcraigroberts.org, and we carry your fine articles every other day when you write them. Final point. I think it's positive, though, that we're seeing 2, 3, 4, 5 million guns sold a month, and they have questionnaires, and they say, I fear the government. I don't trust them. I don't believe in them anymore. Yeah, I mean, in a way, as long as people know that's the hijacked government, and we offer a good solution, I think that really shows that people have finally woken up. Everybody I talk to, including police, military, you name it, they say that most people they know are finally starting to wake up. Do they know as much as you do or others? No. But they're beginning the process of awakening. Your comments on the gun sales?
Well, you know, I agree with what you said. However, I think an armed population is inconsistent with a police state. So I don't know how long the police state and Homeland Security are going to tolerate an armed population. I just don't know. The only protective amendment left of the Constitution is the Second Amendment. All the others are gone. So how can you have the Second Amendment if you can't have habeas corpus or due process? So
and sir, you know history. That's what happened in the lead-ups in 1765 up to 1775 was they took all the rights an Englishman had, and they said, hey, we're Englishmen. We would have these rights in England. Our Magna Carta, you've taken it here. And the British government, the police, the paramilitary said, we're coming to take your guns. And that's when it started. And I think that's where the day they actually try this is when the Civil War starts.
Well, you know, but we're not organized, Alex. Everybody's atomized. At least when the British came against the colonists, there was organization on the part of the colonists. There's none today. We're not organized. And the efforts some years ago to have a militia, they all failed because they were all infiltrated by federal agents. And so I just don't know if that's right. I mean, it's fine with me if it is, and I can be hopeful, but people, as far as I can tell, are not organized, and a lot of them that are collecting guns are really, they still think there's a Muslim threat, and the Muslims are going to get them, or some other racial entity, or it's not a uniform awareness of where the real threat is.
But it is a reservoir that we can fully awaken. Yeah. And I'll tell you, the military, they're waking up. But I agree with you. We need to really... People generally, though, in a manifesto of liberty, they know who the enemy is. They know who did this. And as the persecution and arrest and disappearances begin, that's where they plan to go. There will be resistance because people won't have a choice. And the enforcers, like Alexander Solzhenitsyn talked about, you know, what would have happened if when the enforcers went out, the secret police to grab people, if folks would have stood up. And I think it's that simple idea of total resistance, individually, leaderless resistance.